All right, you guys ready? We may have a couple more folks trickle in. My name is Brannin, and I'm in Los Angeles, and I guess you guys know some of that because you're here for how to develop a vision for your city, right? Something along those lines. We'll get there eventually. I want to do a couple things this morning or this afternoon, wherever we are. I'm lost on my time zones too. I want to set up the framework for how we got to where we are in Los Angeles and how we created a vision for that city that we think is sustainable and achievable. And I want to tell you how we got there. And then I actually want to have some dialogue with you. I want to hear what cities you're in. I want to know where you are in the stage of developing a vision. And I want us to have some feedback to one another to see how we can help you. Is that all right? Okay. Let me just get a show of hands. Who's here from Chicago? Okay. How about from one of the other major cities? Let's do New York. Catherine. L.A.? I would probably know you if you're from one from L.A. After L.A., we don't really need to talk about cities. Right. That's the vision. It's just about L.A. We kind of have that mentality. I'll get to that in a second, too. But how about Boston? I know a couple folks from Boston. Miami? All right. Good. Give me another city.
San Jose.
San Jose? Okay.
Dallas.
Sweet. All right, where in Dallas?
North.
Like Plano area or?
Okay, I live in the north, work at Park Space Presbyterian, so closer to downtown.
I'm a Park Cities guy. All right, there you go. Anybody else? Portland? Colorado? Greeley. Yeah, outside of Denver. Yeah.
Phoenix.
Oh, Phoenix. Great. Surge and all of you guys. Good.
Fort Wayne.
Fort Wayne? Is Fort Wayne really a city?
It is.
Okay.
I can vouch for him. It is a city.
Okay. Who else?
Baton Rouge.
Baton Rouge. All right. Go Tigers. Right?
In Jackson, Mississippi.
Jackson.
From Dallas originally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Great.
Cleveland, Ohio.
Cleveland. Anybody else have a city? Was it mentioned?
Tulsa.
Tulsa, Oklahoma. Okay. Good. Glad you guys are here. This is silly, but this is actually, as my wife and I were talking about on the plane, kind of an easy way to remember how we think about our development of the city's vision. So it's he, me, and we. So I'll go through the first two real fast, but I think they're crucial in our understanding of how we begin to lay a platform in understanding our city. The first one is he, and that is actually the big picture contextualization, biblical contextualization of why you're going to do what you do. It's passages like Romans 1 and 2, Exodus 31, Isaiah 28, Jeremiah 29, James 1, 1 Corinthians, those kinds of capstone passages that set apart why we do what we do in a city like we're in. That begin to lay that biblical foundation, biblical contextualization that should lead us into a deep conviction that our stance towards every human culture should be one of critical enjoyment and then appropriate weariness, right? Just a sense that we begin to think with a Christocentric worldview is really important, and it's always going to lead us to an understanding that it's about Him. We should enjoy the insights of creativity with other peoples and cultures. We should recognize and celebrate expressions of justice, wisdom, truth, and beauty in every culture. And we should approach every culture with an awareness that it's been distorted by sin, in particular the sin of idolatry. It is this great big picture that it's first and foremost Him. It's He, and then me, and then we. Paul uses the gospel to confront and complete each society's baseline narrative. So let me ask you, just a couple people, give me a definition of the gospel. And I'll tell you why this is important in a minute. But just a couple people tell me your definition of the gospel. Bueller? Anybody? Scared?
Okay, I'll say something.
Great. Because you can't be wrong if you're from Baton Rouge.
Exactly.
So,
or I could be wrong,
but
it doesn't matter. I'm just going to speak up. Short definition is pretty much what God did for us without us.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
for the good news.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Christ died to pay the penalty for our sins. He rose again. He's alive. Offers eternal life as a free gift.
Okay.
It's the creation, fall, redemption, restoration.
Okay.
I'd say God sacrificing everything so that He can make us friends
Okay, good. Those are all I do think that we have to define the gospel in the ways that you just did, and that's through the atoning works of Christ first. But it has to be defined in that element first before you can get into the social aspects of what the gospel implies. And we see that as a real problem in LA. We want to jump to the social implications of the gospel. We want to forget the atoning aspects of the work of Jesus Christ. And I think in that big picture, that he part of it, we've got to be able to continue to define first and foremost the atoning works of Jesus Christ as the gospel itself. That's what's going to transform us. That's what's going to transform a city. That's what's going to make it matter. So what does the gospel do? It both humbles us and makes us confident at once. And it makes us critical and faithful to do sound contextualization. Again, that big picture of he. So then, and this has more to do with my understanding of how we approach the city, is the aspect of me. If we settle out what the gospel is and what he's done, and we understand biblical contextualization leads us into a city like we're involved in, and gives us a narrative, gives us a lens in which we can look it through, then we have to ask the question, what about me? How is God using you individually in your understanding of the gospel, in what you're doing to lead a movement or to transform a city or to help out in some form or fashion in creating a vision that God's going to use to extend his kingdom there and beyond? I think that it's important to continually come back to that about me, because he uses broken vessels, obviously. He uses us in different ways, but that means that sometimes when the work gets going fast, when it gets big, when it gets uncontrollable in a sense, we want to just jump out and we want to lead on our own efforts. But the me aspect is, how am I being changed, challenged, and conformed to the gospel? So the first steps, I think, when you're going into the me aspect, is you're looking at the first steps of getting right or get gone. That means that you want to get healthy or you want to die trying, which means that you're always confronting yourself with both the gospel and with your own sinful tendencies. You're always asking for someone's input, whether it's through therapy or whether it's through accountability or whether it's through your personal study or whatever it is. You're asking that you be reshaped and remolded and reformed into Christ's image so that you might see your environment and him all the more. You want to be reminded of the gospel. You want to be rooted in daily personal gospel renewal. You want to be willing to get healthy or die trying, like I mentioned, through therapy or a mentor, accountability, etc. And you want to address the idols of your own heart, because a ministry like this that seeks to change a city will eventually catch up with you, and it will expose your weaknesses, and you will burn out, you will get tired, you will get frustrated, and you will fail. And that's just part of it. So you want to address the personal habits of your life as well. Which means for us, we ask of our leadership, we ask of our church, we ask of our folks involved, really 5 questions to help keep them centered. Those 5 questions go something like this. We have someone involved in our ministries around us or within our church, and they say, I'm just not feeling the Lord right now. I'm just not being connected to what's going on. I'm distant. And in LA, we have an idol of recreation. So that idol of recreation means that I'm not always going to be engaged on a Sunday. That means I may not come to church more than once a month, but that's my church. That's where I want to be. That's who I'm connected to. Those are my people. The reality of that is you're missing one of the 5 key ingredients in your life to remind you of who God is and to have a spiritually balanced life, which is worship, prayer, community, service, and study. So if you're coming to me and you're saying, my life isn't going real well, I'm not feeling Jesus, I'm going to ask you, are you worshiping? And you say, yeah, I'm going to worship. I'm really connected there. Great. How's your prayer life? Well, I haven't really prayed much in a long time. I haven't been connected to God in that way. Okay, let's introduce that back into your life and let's see what goes on. Second one is you say, yeah, my prayer life is going well. What about community? Are you engaged actively in the community that you're part of? No, I really don't have time for community. Well, let's see how you can build that back into your life and get it going. Or you say, my community is going well. What about service? Are you out serving others? No, I haven't really been serving people lately. Okay, let's build that into your life. Let's see what happens. Or you say, yeah, I've been worshiping, I've been praying, I've been involved in the community aspect, I've been serving folks, and even I've been studying the Word. Great. If all 5 of those things are there, there may be something deeper. I think the city exposes some elements in our lives that are more stressful, more tiresome, And you may need to get some help in other ways. But if those 5 areas are there, you're kind of going through. We may need to look at what's going out in other areas, but those are the 5 things for the that we ask amongst our leadership and amongst our staff. Are these areas in your life that are growing you? So the me aspect, and then I think there also needs to be a rhythm as we do work in our cities that's appropriate and sustainable for rest. Now that may be very different for some of you. Some of you may say, I just don't have the time to take a 2-week vacation and to go away. That's okay. But is there regular built-in seasons of rest for you? Because the pounding nature of being involved in these megapolises that are our cities wears us out. Do you have time for retreat? Do you get away? Do you have areas in your life that actually restore you? And the things that restore me may not restore you. The things that restore you may not restore your neighbor. Do you have those things built into your life? Again, on the aspects of just setting the foundation that we focus on he, and then me, and then we. So if those 2 things are there, if he's there, if I'm there, then we can focus on we. And here's where we get into the aspect of the city. So that first part is the leader, the leadership, setting the foundation that ultimately makes it less about you and more about him. So here comes the developing a vision for the city. In Center Church, there's a title in the book on one of the chapters called Active Contextualization, and I actually really like that language. And in that language, I think that you need to discern for yourself and for others. Do you have a call to the city? So I'm going to pick on a couple of you folks for just a minute. Tell me who is from. Let's see, who is from the Denver area? Someone was from Denver. Tell me. Okay, great. How did you know you were called to that city? Were you born there? Did you grow up there? Did you move there? Tell me what that was like to be called to the city.
Serving a church out in the burbs of Greeley, and took the perspectives class and discovered all these Muslim people living in our own city, and started to explore what it meant to interact with them.
Okay.
That just kind of one door opened to the next door to the next, and that just made a promise to the Lord, I'll go through any door that's open.
Okay. And how'd you end up in Greeley at first? Were you?
Took a job as a pastor of a white suburban church.
And then that led you into Denver itself. Great.
Well, this is not Denver. This is north of Denver now.
Okay. With that community. How did you? Or give me somebody else. Who's felt a call to a city somewhere else? How about Dallas? Oh, there you go in the back. See, you avoided the Dallas question. You guys are from Phoenix.
Yep.
How'd you discern your call to Phoenix?
It was a long process, really. There were some other places I thought maybe I was called, and spent a lot of time there, asking a lot of questions, getting to know people, thinking through who I am, the kind of ministry that fits my skill set, looking at the opportunities that existed, seeking input from family and friends. I mean, it wasn't a lightning bolt thing. It was a pretty drawn out process of sensing that was where God was.
And folks around you just kept confirming that over and over again. Yeah, I think that's right. What did you decide? How did you decide what you would do if you failed? Or have you decided that? What would you do? What would you do if you were called to the city and it didn't work? How did you discern that process? Did you? Has anyone thought about that?
I probably wouldn't live there.
You would move.
I would move.
Okay. Here's why I asked that question. I think when you're thinking about a city and you're creating a vision for it, I think you do have to ask the question, am I called? How am I discerning that call? And what if I fail? So ultimately, I think that when you discern that calling and you ask that question, what if I fail? It's his vision, right? If folks around you are saying, you need to go, you need to plant, you need to be there, you need to be involved in the city, if all the signs are right, and you've discerned that, and you've been affirmed in those ways, and you ask the question, what if I fail? It's God's deal, right? It doesn't mean that you failed. It means that he's had some aspect in the involvement in it, that he just didn't want this particular thing to work in that way, or whatever. We have to be okay with that. Because I think that when you're thinking about a big giant city like Phoenix or LA or New York or whatever, there's so many things that start and stop. It doesn't mean that the movement has started and stopped. It means that there's certain aspects that need to be adapted or changed or someone else needs to lead it, but the seeds are being planted, right? If it's God's calling, the seeds are being planted. So I don't think that we need to always say this has to be the right plan A or the right plan B or the right plan C. God's plan is somewhere around E, G, F, whatever, all the way down the line. So I think we do need to say, what happens if I fail? Once you grab that calling and that piece, then you start to think about the city that you're in. I think there's a few things that you can do, and I'll show you in a minute how we did this in LA. But I think you begin to map the city, literally, like you look at the city, what are the outlying areas, what's the city look like physically? Do you know the different cultures of the city? Have you done that kind of research? Not just yours. It's one thing to plant a church. It's another thing to know about the whole city and the movements of the city. Do you know the cultures in the city? What is the ethos of the city? What does it pride itself on? In New York, right? If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. It kind of prides itself on that. In LA, we kind of pride ourselves on being the best. Larry, what would you say LA's ethos is? Tacos and the doctors. That's right. LA has a whole different culture mindset and the ethos there. Your city has an ethos. Your city has an expression. Are you able to define that? Are you able to say what it is? Right? There's a cultural background. There's religious backgrounds. There's ethnic makeup and diversity, etc. What are the resources of the city? Are you able to look at the city and say, here are the things that we have that we can provide, we can use, we can be part of? What are the resources that are part of your city? Who are the power brokers and the gatekeepers of your city? Are you able to ask and answer that question? Who holds the keys to the kingdom in your city? Are you able to identify that and make relationships with those people? Who are the people that are connected to them to get you into the door? And then what are the obstacles of the city? What are the challenges that arise in the city that make it hard for the gospel to go forward or for a movement to take place? And then what does active contextualization look like? This is actually out of the book. It involves a 3-part process: entering the culture, challenging the culture, and then appealing to listeners. We need to be deeply involved in their lives, questions, and concerns of the people, and then we will see God's answer to their questions. Again, questions, thoughts. This is kind of setting up the groundwork for the vision of the city. Any questions about that part? Okay. The 3 things, yeah. The 3-part process of active contextualization is entering the culture, challenging the culture, and then appealing to the listeners. And then here's when you start to actually put pen to paper when you're developing the vision for the city. I think you begin to ask the questions with others. What does your city need? What do you need? What do you need in your city that's not being done that will allow the gospel to be heard? What does your city need? 2, the vision needs to be broad enough that people are attracted to it, but narrow enough that it can be achieved. It needs to be broad enough that people want to be part of it from all different walks of life, but narrow enough that it can be achieved. I'll give you one example that happened to us. We were going to plant a church in New York, and my wife and I are from Houston, and we were in Boston at the time, and we got connected to what was called the Church Planting Center of Redeemer at the time. And we were looking at several areas in New York, but my wife needs to see blue sky and green grass every now and then. And we had 3 tiny little kids, and the thought of living in an 800 square foot apartment with a newborn was a little challenging. So we asked, could we go to Los Angeles? And could we have a little bit of time to get our feet on the ground, learn the area, and then plant out of that? And they said, yeah, no problem, you can do that. Well, there's a group in Texas called the Southwest Church Planting Network, and we were close to them. We were working in Dallas at the time through this process, and their idea was, why don't you start the California Church Planting Network, the whole way up and down the coast, from San Francisco down to San Diego, all the way up to Sacramento and beyond, right? Actually, if you don't know California's geography, San Francisco is about in the middle of the state, but for those in LA, we think that's like basically Washington. It's just up there, right? So we looked at it that way. That's too big of a vision, right? That's too much to do. So we said we just want to focus on Los Angeles, which you think about, it's like, that's too big. It's way too big, but it's narrow enough that we could achieve Los Angeles. We could start thinking about what could we do in Los Angeles? Not the whole state, not every bit of church planting in that area, but just Los Angeles. So your vision has to be broad enough that people want to be part of it, but narrow enough that you can do it. I couldn't go up and down the coast and start church planting networks in San Francisco and San Diego, everywhere else. We just wanted LA. You have those kinds of things that you can ask yourself. What is narrow enough that I can do, but broad enough that people are going to be attached to it? The third thing is you need a vision. The vision needs buy-in from those who are not like you. In a minute, I'm going to tell you about a conference that we held to bring the city together in 2015 called Together LA. And that's when the vision for our city started to come together of what we wanted to do. We asked some of the key leaders in our city if they would have buy-in to this process, that we wanted to look and ask and answer questions about what the city needed, what were the resources. And in order to do that, we needed to have some key leaders involved. So we asked Michael Mata, who's one of the key gatekeepers for the Latino community in Los Angeles, to come and be part of it. And here's what happened. Michael said, I'll come and I'll bring friends. But they're coming, I just want you to know this, they're coming because of me. Because they've been burned over and over and over again by the white church saying, hey, come and be part of something that we're doing. So they came and they listened and they said, we'll be part of it because Michael's part of it. But we're really leery. I said, okay. We went to the African American community and a guy named Oscar Owens, and we sat at West Angeles Church of God in Christ, and we talked and talked and talked and talked, and Oscar said, I'll get folks there, but I want to know what your vision is. What's your ministry statement? What's the purpose of this? And I said, we can't write that until you have input in with us. We can't say what it is until you have some dialogue with us to give your input. And he said, now I'm sold. Now my people will be there. Gatekeepers, right? The vision is bought in by others. And then we asked Larry Acosta, help us understand what it's like to work within the inner city with the youth. And what are the needs there? And Larry says, let me come in and be part of this. Let me help you out. Let me help you figure out what the questions are and the needs, and I'll bring my folks. And we asked Ephraim Smith, who was leading World Impact at the time. What does it mean to plant churches in the city that are center city, that are urban in context? And so we needed that buy-in from folks. You need a vision buy-in from those who are not like you, right? We could easily throw something together with folks just like us, but we needed folks who were not like us. Fourth, you need to address your own attitudes towards the city. I think that if you address what your own attitude is towards the city, you're going to have these at different times, and it's okay, but you've got to be able to go back and look at it. Is your attitude indifferent? Is it romanticized? Is it hostile? Or is it positive? Sometimes that comes in to affect us at different angles. And as you're putting this together with folks, as you're getting together with folks, sometimes your ideal of the city becomes romanticized. Wow, if we could just have this come together with you guys, it'll all be good. It all makes all the things happen in our city. Or it becomes hostile. You know, why is it so hard to work with you in this area? Why is it so difficult to get this going? Why can't you just buy in? Is it positive that there's difficulties here? It's going to take some time. It's not my work, but it's the Lord's work. What is your attitude towards the city that you get in any time? Ultimately, loving and serving the city strengthens the hands of the people of God who bear the message of the gospel to the world. So, here's what we did in Los Angeles. We mapped the city. Literally, if you come into my office, you can see a breakdown of our area in Pasadena. But we mapped the whole city of LA. And we said, here's the folks who live here, here's who lives here, here's who lives here, here's who lives here. We mapped it. And we said the city is a megapolis. It's a mass urban sprawl. In Los Angeles, we knew that people wouldn't mind driving a certain distance. because we drive everywhere, right? Another city, that's not going to be possible because you live on top of each other. You don't want to drive anywhere. You want to be in walking distance. But in LA, that wasn't the case. And yet we knew that in LA, that the city council had just decided that they wanted to identify 119 different neighborhoods in Los Angeles. So if that was the case, we wanted to say, then do we plant a church in every neighborhood of Los Angeles? Do we start a church in every single neighborhood? So it does become, the mass urban sprawl becomes a small neighborhood community. And we said yes. That's a need that we have. That's something that the city is promoting. That's something that the city is getting behind. That's something that we can say your neighborhood needs this kind of revitalization going. Now, whether a church is planted there or we get in with existing churches that are doing great work in those neighborhoods, 119 different areas in Los Angeles could be identified that we could say, yes, that's what we want to target. We wanted to learn about the churches and the current networks. We want to learn about movements and the ministries and the business leaders, importantly. We wanted to know who those people were in each neighborhood and in the city as a whole. So we identified the current networks of movements. We identified the ministries that were going on that we wanted to be part of because we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. And we identified business leaders. We needed to have buy-in from the Christian leaders who were working in the marketplace so that they could help us make inroads into the community. There was a young, sometimes you shoot for the stars, so go ahead.
It's just, for the context of who's we?
When I say we, I'm talking about our little leadership that we had in Los Angeles. Whatever your leadership is, whatever your...
You mean you, or do you mean you and your wife, or do you mean you and your church?
Yeah, so it was me and 5 other leaders from churches around. Yeah.
Is it like city to city?
So,
Are they local leaders that you've partnered with or church?
yeah, so maybe I'll back up and explain that piece so it makes a little more sense to you. I was going to do that at the end, but I'll do it now. So we wanted to ask and answer the question, what does it mean to love your city? And when I say we, it was a group of folks who invited Tim to come out and speak at a church. This is the backstory, okay? So in 2011, one of our churches sent out an email to Tim and said, would you come and preach at our church and begin to ask the question, what does it mean to love the city? Tim said, no, I won't do that. I won't come and speak at your church. But I will come and speak to a group of churches to help a movement get going. So we said, okay. That church, myself, and one other group said, we can do that. So those folks, myself included, said we can put that together with another few churches. So we gathered 5 churches that said they wanted to be involved. So those 5 heads said, let's put this together, and we called it Together LA. And we said, we want to ask and answer the question, what does it mean to love the city? When we began to say that to love the city means that we're going to plant churches, because that's what's being promoted. We're going to plant churches. To plant churches means that we're loving the city, and we're part of a church planting movement, and we've all bought into that, and so we're just going to have a church planting conference. When we said, these 5 churches said, in order to do that, we need buy-in from the African American church, we need buy-in from the Latino church, we need buy-in from the Asian church, we need buy-in from all these other areas. We said, great, they'll all be for planting churches. And yet when we sat down at the table, none of them were. So to ask the question, what does it mean to love the city and build a vision for the city, didn't mean planting churches. It meant that for some people. But what it meant for the African American church was, here, I'll just go to it. It meant 3 categories: social justice, church maturity, and marketplace issues. The African American church said, that's fine. We don't understand church planting. We don't want to church plant. But if you want to understand what it means to love your city, you need to address joblessness, fatherlessness, racial reconciliation. You need to address long-standing systemic issues within our city. One of the things that LA has, and we learned this in the process, was the deeds to the homes in our cities are still racial dividing. You cannot sell your home in Los Angeles to a person outside of your color or race. That's still on the deeds. Is that right still, Larry?
I live in West Virginia, and that seems backwards.
It's totally backwards, right? So no one practices it. It's totally illegal. But if you go back and look at the deeds on your home, the systemic issues in California, in Los Angeles, still segregate the city in that way. We didn't know that, right? Asking those kinds of questions and sitting with them means that in order to love the city, it's far beyond church planting. We have to address these issues. They also had issues of Christian maturity and church maturity. How do we do discipleship? And in particular, how do we train our youth that are leaving the church in record numbers? Okay, we need to address that. When we talked to the Latino leaders, it had more to do with joblessness, with immigration issues. Los Angeles in particular, we were dealing a lot with immigration. And they said, if you're going to love the city, you need to talk about that. That's important to us. I said, okay, great. For other folks, it was mercy ministry cooperation. We needed to address the idols of the culture. It was pastor fellowship aspects. There were all these things that came out that said, if we're really going to start a movement that transforms the city to build a vision, we've got to address these. Now, all of a sudden, your vision gets too big, right? It's too much for you to do. But if you're saying we're going to come together and begin to address these issues in small little snippets, and you look at it in 3 sections of social justice, Christian maturity, marketplace issues, then who's doing what? What are the means in which we can get some of these things accomplished? Who has the energy or the ministry that's already developed that we can piggyback on and highlight to say this is one way in which we want to stay together and love the city? So over the course of 2 years, we worked with these groups. We brought folks in, and the team went from 5 to about 12 folks who are deeply engaged in putting this together. And then we captured that in a conference that we called Together LA. It was a 3-day event, much like this, that we launched. And Michael Mata said nothing like that had happened in the last 20 years, and nothing at that level. What we were not able to do completely, and is decide whether or not we were going to continue to do that every year or every 3 years or every 5 years, and how are we going to follow up with little bits and pieces in between. So we took a model after Lausanne, if you know the International Congress on World Evangelism. We decided to have breakout groups that go on during the year, and then about every 5 to 7 years probably we'll do a big conference. And so we've got little groups going around LA called Together LA groups that talk about these issues, that get folks together, that are pocketed in these neighborhoods. So if you say, hey, I'm in Pasadena, and my family and I are going down to Culver City, I want to look on the website and I want to see what's going on in Culver City for the weekend. Maybe there's a habitat project that's taking place, or maybe there's a breakout group that's happening that week in Culver City, and I want to hear what's going on with those folks. There's a group in Paramount, which is down near Long Beach. Paramount was a city that was just overrun with violence and with all sorts of issues. And a church called Emmanuel Presbyterian Church, about, I'm going to say 20 years ago, said we can divide our little city into neighborhood portions as well, and we can go block by block by block by block, and we can paint homes, and we can clean up yards, and we can pick up trash. So they've got a warehouse. It's probably about 15,000 square feet, filled with rakes and brooms and paintbrushes and all sorts of stuff. And their church members and folks around the community just come in, they pick up rakes, they pick up paintbrushes, they go to a house, they clean it up. And if you go to Compton, which is a neighboring city, or if you go to, what's next to Compton? Is that? Well, Inglewood's close, but there was something that's between Paramount. It's, I'm blanking. If you go to Compton, the other area, there's still lots of dirt and debris on the ground. The mayor of Compton is doing a good job to clean that up. But if you go into Paramount, it's spotless. It's crazy. It's absolutely spotless. And they attribute that to the churches in Paramount working together that was started by Emmanuel so long ago. They attribute that to the work that's been done by them to build in that understanding that we do this together. If you talk to Rafer Owens, who's a pastor in Paramount, he's a sheriff and he's a pastor, and he has a church of about 150 folks, and he's a gatekeeper in the city, and he says if it's not for Emmanuel starting this, we wouldn't be together. And it's black, white, Latino, you name it, all in this group together. It's beautiful to see. That gives you kind of a little bit of background of the we, right? We wanted to work with business leaders as well. So that meant that we needed to create a vision to say, think locally, hire locally, think creatively, Can you hire young kids to do an internship? These kids who've come out of bad family situations, maybe they have a fatherless situation. Can you hire them, train them, put them to work? So there's been 2 companies in the art district that have started to do that. A group called Apollos and a restaurant called Wurstkuche, which is a German sausage restaurant. I don't know. It's good. They have started to hire youth. They've started to hire folks who live in the art district who need extra work. And then one of the companies started to hire some homeless folks to do some cleanup work with them. And it does a couple things. Our churches do this too. Our church does it. Other churches do it. We hire the homeless to do Sunday setup, and the Apollos hires them to do some cleanup around the area to establish a resume. Gives them a little bit of money in their pocket, but it really establishes a resume so that they can go back and say, I've been gainfully employed for this long. It doesn't really matter about the money. It matters that they've been doing something. That was one way to love our city and to care for them. What we were trying to do in the end was to tear down the empire model. It's not about one church. It's not about one ministry doing it all. It's not about any one person getting the credit. It's about tearing all of that down and saying that we want this expression to be more than about us and our neighborhood. We've had churches back out. We've had churches pull away and say that they don't want to do this because it's not enough about them. We had one church say that we've got everything covered. And so we don't need to be involved in anything that you're doing. But if you want to come and be part of what we're doing, we're happy to have you involved. The folks that we're involved with and what we're trying to do, we don't want to do that. We want to be more about being together than being apart. We want to be a city that's unbroken. In the end, with that, it looks a little bit like this. We see the city that roughly, by latest statistics, Los Angeles is about 19 million people. The largest churches in Los Angeles, there's about 2 or 3 of them on any given Sunday, have about 12,000 people going. You need roughly 1,600 churches that size in a city of Los Angeles to to meet everybody. It's two ants fighting over who gets to eat the elephant, right? So is your vision big enough to say, I want to capture the city, I want to look at what's going on, I want to be able to address the needs of the city, but is it narrow enough to say we have to do it in small little segments that's achievable? We cannot start 1,600 12,000 member churches. That's just not right. But we can start 1,600 200 member churches. We can start ministries that help reach others to connect smaller groups of people together. We can continue to ask and answer the question, what does it mean to love our city? We can say this is going to take some time and it's going to take some resources, but it's also going to take a real cooperative spirit with one another just to say, we love you, we care for you, we're here with you. And I'll tell you one bit of how it's come back to church planting. I am deeply convinced that more churches are needed, and so church planting just runs through my veins. The African American church that I'm very close to, that hosted our conference, has not planted a church in over 75 years. And they are great. So every Sunday morning, for the last 3 years, I text back and forth with one of the leaders there. And I just say, Oscar, I'm praying for you. I love you. He says the same thing. We've been keeping this communication going. And he says, I think I'm ready to plant a church. I said, great. What are the resources in your church? We don't have any. Now, this is a giant church. It's the largest church by some measure still in L.A. He said, we don't have it in our budget. I said, great. What if we find you $100,000 to plant a church? Great. If it's not in your budget, we'll put it in. We don't know how to do it. Because the trust has been built, he knows that we can give that money to the church, no strings attached. The only string is plant a church out of it, right? And we'll back away. It can be all for your glory and your credit. It can all be West Angeles Church of God in Christ Church. And he says, but we need to be trained. We said, great, we'll give you all the training that you need from our side, and we want to interact with you on that way, but we don't want any acknowledgement that it's from us. Great. that takes a lot of time and investment to build that trust. But it starts putting in some of our vision as well. In order to love the city is to plant churches, right? Because we're helping in other ways. We're helping in other things. So that's a little bit about LA. Feel free to ask questions. Let's talk about your area and what some of the needs that you're coming up with. Anybody? Bueller?
Question.
Yeah.
In terms of LA, since the focus is on vision, what was unique about your vision that was specific to LA?
I have an answer for that. I just don't want it to seem prideful. I think what was unique about my vision,
It's okay.
yeah.
We're not, no
Yeah.
judgment.
Larry, you confirm this or don't. I think because of the situation that my wife and I are in and what we've done, we are uniquely positioned to help build something that's not about us. And so I think every step of the way, people have just been taken back that it is not about what we want to do or enforce our thoughts or vision. So it's not about city to city. It's not about our little church. It's not about Brandon's ministry. It's not about this or that. It's about actually empowering and equipping the movement of God throughout the city for others to enjoy. Is that fair?
I think that's very fair, and I would say, in fairness to that, LA was very fragmented, like a lot of cities. But I felt like the church in LA, it was extremely fragmented. No one's collaborating whatsoever on any level. Brannin, because of his situation, he could come and serve a movement in the city. He didn't need to put his name on it and things of that nature. He didn't need other people's resources to make it happen. He could help rally people and resources and invest. He has a lot of skin in the game that his family put into the movement. So it positioned the movement to moving from this siloed out city to greater collaboration, because people saw Brannin and his posture as a humble servant leader who wasn't trying to do this for personal gain. And the times things were, people tried to move things forward in LA previously, it got a little too egocentric, and someone was trying to put their name or their church or their brand or their denomination on it, and it just failed every time. So I do think it was unique what Brannin was able to do with a small team, actually.
Yeah. I don't know.
I think if I could just flip it, I think, let's say, in Boston, the obvious idolatry is just
the Red Sox.
academia. Well,
yeah, it is
that's
academia.
A religion.
That's right. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So, I mean, a lot of people move to Boston or the Cambridge area, especially because the nut to crack is higher education.
Correct. You have to preach in that way too.
And so the question is, clearly, if that's the idolatry, people are called, and there's a lot of consensus around the vision. But the challenge is, like, struggling with pride. Are we specifically, as a church or a network, called to that broader vision that's so specific to Boston, or is that someone else's job, or is it our pride to thinking we can do that? I mean, do you know what? Do you know the question I'm asking?
That your particular church can address the issue of their pride being academia.
The vision of reaching out to the highest echelon of academia should, and there is a need for it, should be our vision.
Okay, let me go back to the big part of this topic, right? There are many MINI visions within a movement in the city. Is that part of what's going to change the culture of Boston? Is that all of Boston? Obviously, that's a huge piece of Boston. But I'm going to be frank with you. That is a very narrow part of Boston. I mean, I think you look at Boston, you can say that's absolutely one of the idols of Boston. But if you get into Danvers, if you get into where's South? Anyway, you get into some of the areas. they're poor, they're not so ethnically diverse, but they're monoculture in that sense. And I think you have to be able to say, how am I addressing their issues as well? So is your vision broad enough to address the city, or is it only specific enough to address this higher academic area? Are we only going to target them? That may be part of a vision, but it may not be the whole vision. Does that make sense? I think you have to ask. You have to sit with folks who are not like you, or not addressing that, and say, is this? Can we be part of it together? But the vision has to capture both.
So where have you had the biggest divides?
For us, it's been in. I'm going to try and say this correctly. It's in building the racial bounds again, having trust built, not saying, here's another white movement coming in to say, here's how we do it, and let's get our token Latino, our token African American to come in and say, yay, let's rally the troops. But actually to have skin in the game to say, we're with you, serving you. We want to be in this together. That's been the hardest challenge, is to build that trust. And it just comes in little tiny bits and pieces. And when it comes, it's great. But LA is so big and so vast that this church here may be big and wonderful and helpful, but a church on this side doesn't know it yet. And so we're having to do the same thing over here with them and have them call. Bishop Ulmer's having to call Bishop Blake and say, this white guy wants to talk to me. Should I talk to him or not? And it's that kind of thing.
Two-part question. First one is, you use the language of developing a vision, and what do you do to discern, I guess, what God's vision is for the city? And then the second part is, you talked a lot about what the gathered church is doing, which is maybe up to 10% of 98% of the population of the church's time. But what about the church scattered, when that's 110 hours per week? How are they being involved in God's vision for LA?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll take that one first. That's one area that we've got to say. You need the church leaders, you need the ministry leaders, and you need the marketplace leaders. What are they doing during the week that is encouraging that? And that takes place on the very local level. So we encourage them to be part of the local community, that their worship expression, their community groups, to be invested in their churches, but also to find avenues in which they can meet during the week in affinity groups. So lawyers, doctors, actors, screenwriters, or whatever else are meeting around the city, and that gets tricky in a city like LA, where sometimes you're meeting in those groups to get out of it what you can achieve, right? So I'm making a network connection for myself. And there's one group that I know of that meets at 6 a.m. on Tuesday mornings in the Arts District in LA. It's just men, and they have several. I mean, if I named off some of the Hollywood things that they've done, you'd know it. But they just go there, and it's by invitation only, so that they know it's not. They're not being used by others to get into network, and they're trying their best to find ways to be humble with themselves and to say, how can we do this? So that group's been meeting for about 3 years now, and as they meet, they gather for an hour and a half. They have coffee and a bagel. I think they go through this structure. They pray together. They repent of their sins. It's a group of 15 or so. They repent of their sins, and then they spend the last 30 minutes talking about areas in which they're investing in the city to see ministry grow. And so some of them have actually been buying up buildings to use for different purposes and to rent out to church plants on Sundays. That's happened 3 times now with some of the buildings that they bought.
I guess I was more driving towards, people spend most of their time in their jobs, and how are they using their jobs to challenge the structures and the systems that keep people in those systems, and not allowing the church to change towards the vision. I mean, that's where that's the most power that we have.
Yeah.
And it seems like we're just focused on a couple hours a week.
Catherine behind you can answer that completely. So that's her whole expertise.
I thought that might be one of your divides, actually, because that it's not necessarily the same people that are interested in the social justice that have that power. So
How have you seen it play out?
I've seen it be divided. I've not seen any good models.
Yeah. She's the expert.
Mm-hmm.
So, question. You've been asking for a minute.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that there's going to be other movement leaders coming to LA, and there are other denominations that have streams of ministry. How are you, and will you incorporate them in your vision?
Yeah, we do. The vision hasn't changed. It's how do we love the city, right? How do we love LA? And they're coming in, and they want to be part of something that connects them to others, and they're buying into that. So it's a multifaceted approach to the city. They're taking on leadership roles. They're taking on let's say they plant in, or not plant, but they're either leading a ministry, they're planting a church, they're working in an area. We're asking them to get involved in that little neighborhood that they're in and begin to understand the culture there and bring that to us and say, what can we do? But yeah, it's totally open, totally wide, as long as they, are, Nicene Creed kind of Christians. But,
two-part question. One is your network just informally connection, or is it formally organized?
That's something I think that we're working through, and whether to formalize it or not. But it's been informal, and I think personally that there's benefits to that. Others don't, and we'll see what happens. But because it's informal, it has a lot of there's some confusion with folks about who's in charge and what's going on. But if it was formalized, I think we alienate a few more people at this stage.
And how has City to City been a resource to you and your network?
Yeah, City to City has been an incredible resource for us in the church planting arm. We've noticed with all the church planting networks in our city, they've done a good job of planting churches. They've done a good job, especially in the last 10 years, of retaining church planters. So we had a mass exodus of churches that would start and fail, or a pastor would come in and then they'd leave within 10 years. And so there was no trust built among church plants. In the last 10 years, with multiple ministries going on, multiple networks going on, we've seen churches planted and pastors stay, and they're successful. What they've failed at over and over again is the continual ongoing training of church planters, especially in the early days. And City to City has been remarkable in coming in and helping us launch Incubator, help us think through all sorts of issues along that line. And so it's been very strategic and razor sharp in that area alone. On the other areas, we need some help and we need others involved. But that's what they've been most helpful with.
Can you speak a little bit more about what the leadership does look like? You had mentioned that it's kind of organic and relational, but is there like a core team, and what are your rhythms for gathering?
Yeah. At the micro level right now, we have established Together LA is a separate 501c3. We have advisory folks. There's about 5 advisory folks who speak into that, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4 staff members, and 2 of them revolve around the website and telling the story of the city. One of them goes out and finds ministries or churches throughout the city to tell the story. Don't go and look at the website now. It's totally a mess and it's being redone. But the idea is that we would tell the story so that people kind of latch onto it of different areas. And that'll come out in the next month or so, the revised kind of look at this. One is helping to lead all of our efforts in church planting. And then we have another guy, Larry, hopefully, will come on to help a pipeline of church planters and ministry leaders come through. And then we need someone to come in and help with kind of the broader connection of churches as a whole to make sure that we're networking. That's probably 2 or 3 people of the city the size of LA. We did a good job of launching, and we've done a really bad job of maintaining. And now we're trying to put the pieces back together. But it's incredibly lean, and it's all built upon goodwill and handshake agreements and people volunteering their time to say, I believe in this vision and I saw what could happen and I want to go and be part of it. So I get calls 2 or 3 times a week saying, hey, I was part of this. I've been part of this over the last couple of years. I want to tell you what's going on. Can I go forward with it? They're asking permission. And we're just saying, of course, go do what you need to do. Keep us informed, and we just got to figure it out. It's just too much to know all at once. And that's where the problem with not formalizing has come in.
So tangentially, so it seems like it's about sustainability now. What is the biggest need for you in this that you your biggest need for Together LA?
Our biggest need is a continual and ongoing renewal of building trust amongst the leaders in the city. So it's not just a one and done, but how do we continue to serve you over and over again? Our biggest effort right now is through church planting, but I think our biggest need is continually building those relationships over and over again so that we're crossing the racial boundaries, we're crossing the socioeconomic boundaries, we're putting efforts both with time and with resources into leaders in our city who need it and who say they want it and who can use it, I mean, frankly. But that I think that's one of our areas. Is that
I'm sorry, I was lost in the name of your organization.
Together LA.
Together LA.
Yep.
Does Love LA still exist?
No, not that I know of. There's been a couple of movements that have started with that title. One was more of a Love LA. One of them was a movement to do kind of a Serve LA Day, and then there was another bigger movement called Love LA that we've been trying to find out some information, but we
well, Jack Hayford and Lloyd Ogilvie started that. They would have prayer regularly.
Yeah, and that hasn't continued as far as we know. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you give like a certain time frame for establishing a vision? Like, I know you have like all the planning to do. Like, is there like a certain, like, obviously you want to give it time, but at the same time you don't want it to drag out for too long. Like, how do you work through that?
I'm pretty intuitive, so I don't like to move until I feel like the Lord has said it's time. So I'll wait and wait and wait and wait and wait and wait until I feel like I'm released to go and do it. I also like to have the consensus being built. And sometimes that can take too long. We've been talking about this North American leader. We've been talking about city to city North America happening for 15 years now. And this is our first conference. I think that's too long. But I think that for the Together LA piece, it took, to get the vision right, took about a year and a half. And that was to make sure we had all the people at the table we needed to have. And to begin, not that we understand completely, but to begin to understand the needs of the city. We needed that long to build that in. Yeah, Dallas.
Can you talk about working with nonprofits from a church standpoint? I feel like sometimes we tend to pass things off on nonprofits because they're taking the reins and doing it, but as a church, we are to be responsible for things. So what is that?
So that's a great question, but it may be too specific to address as a network leading a city.
Right.
And I'll take it from our perspective. We want to equip and empower and highlight the ministries in our city. But that means that we have to help churches think through how to partner together, but we can't do that for them. So our network, our vision for the city is that we connect folks together and ask and answer the question, what does it mean to love the city? But that may look very different from one church to one ministry to the next. And so when you get into the specifics of it, we can start talking about how have some churches worked and how have others happened. In LA, homelessness is a huge issue. There, I don't know how many countless ministries that are dealing with homelessness. And not one of them is right. All of them have a certain aspect that's right. But they all do very different things or similar things. And the church can come alongside and partner, and we're encouraging churches to do that, like employ homeless folks. But we can't solve that for them either. So we don't say that we're trying to fix that and to partner. We're just highlighting this ministry is doing a great job. Homeboy Industries. Does anybody know that one? Greg Boyle is basically, kind of the Pope of LA in a lot of ways. I mean, he just gets up and speaks, and he's wonderful, and he's great, and everyone loves him. They do a fantastic job. So what we do as Together LA is highlight what they're doing and encourage folks to give to certain projects that they're doing. And we will say, Homeboy Industries is trying to raise $80,000 to get another tattoo removal machine. And we'll blast that out to the churches and to the ministries around and see if we can gather the funds so that Together LA has put together a piece that provides for this particular ministry. And we do that with others as well. Does that help a little?
How are you funded?
Individual donations or churches, or particularly for me, City to City North America has said we want folks to be freed up from their jobs.
City's point of view,
Yep.
churches are a drain.
Yeah.
Oftentimes because they don't pay property taxes, they don't pay income taxes,
Yep.
and they tend to be insulated. Do you subtract for those things? I'm just curious.
No, we say again the question.
Opportunity cost,
Yeah.
because if it wasn't for a church, it would be a business there that could contribute to something else. So.
Yeah, so there's other directions to take the calculation, but what this answers is things when I was in budget meetings as a counselor and would come up like that, and you would say, well, no, they're kind of good, they should be there, but you don't have anything pragmatic to say about them. I would say now in those cases, and I've been at many trade shows and stuff where I've talked to mayors and counselors, and I'd say, well, fine, if you don't want them, let's say you want to tax them, or you want to put extra burdens on them because you don't think they're carrying their share. But if there's 50% less of them in your community in 10 years, your quality of life in that community will be lower because you can't possibly afford to fill the gap. The reality is municipalities are so cash strapped that you can say it costs them $4.70 per dollar, but they would never afford that. It just means quality of life will diminish. And in fact, we're building some suburbs and other places with no provision for any religious institutional space. And I would say the long-term prognosis for those communities is that it's going to be difficult. They're going to face uphill battles. So whether it's $4.77 or $2.77 or whether we've calculated everything in, it is in a sense kind of illustrative of the point that they're not, you can't just automatically say it's negative. We put a pin in the board to say, no, it's positive. If you want to provide counter evidence, great. Let's talk about it. We need more research on these groups. And there's clearly not enough done. Ram's a leading pioneer. I asked him when I met with him years ago. I said, who else is doing this? He says, nobody. We're leading the edge. And Ram himself is not a person of faith. He doesn't, but he just has studied them and said, these are remarkable entities in the landscape. What are these things? Well, they're these congregations. So it's quite interesting, actually, to see that develop. So where did I say we'd go? Oh, yeah, there. Yeah, and then.
Just a comment. I'm a former city planner, now a pastor, and I would say among my colleagues, and so this is more of an exhortation, this stuff, learning just even a little bit of this, helps you avoid accidentally encouraging actions by your city that will have long-term negative consequences. So knowing even a little bit of this, just reading one of these things, would help you when you are in a meeting for some other random reason to not accidentally encourage something that will have long-term negative consequences. It's just a really
good point.
lens.
I would also suggest that I think most of the people that should be involved in these structural strategic things aren't the pastor. I think in all of your groups there is that one or two people who, like myself, have a certain nerd gene along the line that just need to be released to go and say, pay attention to this for us. I'm not suggesting you need to do this. In fact, I would argue, find someone else. Somebody around you gets really excited thinking about this stuff. It might be strange. I mean, there's people around me who don't really, this is odd stuff. Why do you like doing this? I don't know, but I do, and I think it's important. So just encourage you, I think, along that somebody needs to be literate. You don't all need to be literate. We don't all need to be doing this. But somebody needs to be, and that could be a really valuable piece in the puzzle. Yeah.
My question was right along the lines of that last
statement.
Okay. Kind of take it one more level down to ground level. What does this look like?
Yeah.